I'm Olivia Turner, 32 years old, and 3 years ago, I made the hardest decision of my life, cutting ties with my toxic family. The silence was peaceful until last month when a cream envelope arrived with a formal invitation to my grandmother's 80th birthday dinner. I knew something was wrong when my sister Madison's name was listed as the host. What I didn't know was that she'd hired private investigators to publicly expose me as a failure. The dread in my stomach mixed with determination as I opened my closet to find the perfect outfit. Before I tell you how my own sister tried to publicly humiliate me but ended up eating her words, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to distance yourself from toxic people. Growing up in Westport, Connecticut meant living in a picture-perfect colonial house with manicured lawns that matched our family's carefully crafted image of success. From the outside, the Turner family had everything. My father, Robert, was a respected investment banker. My mother, Victoria, was involved in every charity board in town, and their two daughters were expected to be reflections of their impeccable taste and ambition. But behind our glossy white front door with its brass knocker that visitors always complimented, reality was cold as the marble floors in our entryway. I was 4 when Madison was born, and I can still remember the way my parents' faces transformed. When they looked at her, a softness appearing that I'd never seen directed at me. Madison had these perfect blonde curls and big blue eyes that people called angelic, while I had straight brown hair and hazel eyes that my mother once described as ordinary when comparing us in photos. When Madison was learning to walk, my father would spend hours in the living room, arms outstretched, cheering for every wobbly step. When I brought home straight A's in 3rd grade, he signed the report card without looking up from his wall. Street journal. That's what we expect, was all he said. But Madison's kindergarten finger painting earned a special frame in his office. By the time I was 10 and Madison was 6, the pattern was undeniable. Thanksgiving at Grandmother Eleanor's house, my mother interrupted my story about winning the spelling bee to direct everyone's attention to Madison's new dress. Doesn't she look like she could be in a magazine? The adults all cooed while I sat with the congratulations stuck in my throat. My grandmother was the only one who noticed, slipping me a wink from across the table and later pressing a silver bookmark into my hand. "For my little reader," she whispered. "Your mind is your greatest gift." Those small moments with grandmother Eleanor were islands of warmth in the cold sea of my childhood. Madison quickly learned to navigate the family dynamics to her advantage. When we shared a bedroom, she would wait until our parents were in earshot to start crying, claiming I'd said something mean or taken her toys. By the time I could defend myself, my parents had already decided I was guilty. "Why can't you be nice to your sister?" my mother would demand, never considering there might be another side to the story. As we grew older, Madison's tactics became more sophisticated. In middle school, she'd borrow my homework to copy answers, then somehow twist the story to make me sound like the one being selfish if I objected. "Olivia's so competitive she won't even help me understand math," she'd tell our parents, wide-eyed and wounded. When I was 16 and Madison was 12, I overheard my mother planning Madison's future debutante ball while folding laundry. She'll wear the vintage pearls, of course. She has the perfect neck for them, unlike Olivia. I stood in the hallway, clean towels clutched to my chest, invisible. To please them, I threw myself into academics, thinking achievement might finally win their approval. National Honor Society, editor of the school newspaper, early admission to Berkeley with a partial scholarship. At my high school graduation dinner, my father raised his glass to Olivia for doing what was expected. Then he turned to Madison, only 14, but already the center of attention in a dress too mature for her age. And to Madison, our shining star, who's going to outshine everyone when her turn comes. I smiled through gritted teeth while Grandmother Eleanor squeezed my hand under the table. "They don't see your light," she whispered. "But that doesn't mean it isn't blazing." That fall, I flew 3,000 miles away to California, telling myself it was for the prestigious university, but knowing deep down I was escaping the only way I knew how. Berkeley felt like breathing for the first time after years underwater. My dorm room was tiny, half the size of my bedroom at home, but entirely mine. My roommate Zoe, with her collection of vintage band posters and loud laugh, couldn't have been more different from the polished, careful girls my mother approved of back home. "You've seriously never had Thai food?" she asked incredulously during our first week, then dragged me to a hole-in-the-wall restaurant where we ate pad thai from paper plates and talked until midnight. For the first time, I had friends who didn't know my family, didn't compare me to Madison, and seemed to genuinely enjoy my company. I joined the marketing club, volunteered at an animal shelter, and dyed a streak of purple in my hair just because I could. When I FaceTimed home and my mother gasped, "What have you done to yourself?" it felt like a victory. Of course, independence had its price. Though my parents paid my tuition and sent a monthly allowance for expenses, each deposit came with strings attached. "We saw you posted pictures at some party instead of studying," my father would say during our Sunday check-in calls. "Remember that we're investing in your future, not funding a 4-year vacation." When I made Dean's List my first semester, my mother's response was, "Well, it's not like Berkeley is as competitive as Yale or Harvard." The distance made their criticism easier to bear, but the financial dependency kept me tethered to their expectations. Summer breaks were exercises in regression. I'd return to Connecticut to find Madison's star had risen further in my absence. At 16, she was now modeling locally and had a boyfriend from one of the Wright families who drove an expensive car his parents had given him. "Madison's been invited to the Richardson's summer gala," my mother announced over breakfast my first day home after freshman year. "We need to take her shopping for an appropriate dress." No one mentioned that I'd been overlooked for an internship I'd spent months applying for. Everything in the house revolved around Madison's schedule, Madison's friends, Madison's potential. I spent most of that summer hiding in the local library or at my grandmother's house across town, where I could breathe again. It was during my junior year that I met Jason at a campus entrepreneurship seminar. He had thoughtful brown eyes and a way of listening that made me feel heard for the first time in my life. On our third date, when I found myself explaining my family dynamics and then immediately apologizing for dumping on him, he took my hands across the table. "Olivia, you don't have to apologize for sharing your experiences. That's not dumping, that's trusting me enough to be real." His parents were both teachers who'd raised him to value authenticity over appearances, something so foreign to my upbringing that it felt revolutionary. As our relationship grew serious, I introduced Jason to my parents during spring break. My father immediately questioned Jason's career prospects in software development, while my mother made thinly veiled comments about his off-the-rack suit. Later, I overheard her on the phone with Madison. "She's dating someone completely inappropriate. No family connections, no real prospects. I think she's doing it just to rebel." Madison met Jason the next day and immediately began a campaign of subtle undermining. She flirted with him aggressively while simultaneously telling me privately that he'd been checking her out when I wasn't looking. "I'm just concerned for you," she said with practiced sincerity. "You deserve someone loyal." When Jason showed no interest in her games, Madison switched tactics, telling our parents that she'd seen texts on my phone from other guys. The accusation was completely fabricated, but my parents immediately believed her. The confrontation that followed was ugly. "We didn't raise you to behave this way," my mother said, her voice sharp with disapproval. "If you can't make better choices, perhaps we need to reconsider our financial support." When I called Madison out for lying, my parents accused me of jealousy and immaturity. 2 weeks later, after I refused their demand to break up with Jason, they cut my monthly allowance in half as a life lesson in consequences. Jason found me crying in the campus coffee shop after I got the news. "We'll figure it out together," he promised, helping me apply for a campus job and rework my budget. For the rest of junior year, I worked 20 hours a week at the university bookstore while maintaining my GPA. My parents seemed almost disappointed when I didn't fail academically under the added pressure. By graduation day, I'd managed to keep my relationship with Jason strong and my academics intact, despite my family's disapproval. All 4 of them attended the ceremony: my parents, Madison, and grandmother Eleanor. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I heard my grandmother's distinct whistle above the applause. At the dinner afterward, Madison somehow steered the conversation toward her upcoming high school graduation and the modeling contract she'd been offered. "We're just so proud of how she's managing school with her blossoming career," my mother gushed to the neighboring table. I caught Jason's eye across the breadbasket and knew I wasn't invisible anymore, at least not to him. After graduation, Jason and I found a small apartment in Oakland that we could just barely afford. He started as a junior developer at a tech startup, while I landed an entry-level position at a marketing firm in San Francisco. Our apartment had peeling paint and a temperamental refrigerator, but it was ours, filled with secondhand furniture and ambitious dreams. For 6 months, things were looking up. I was learning rapidly at work, impressing my supervisor with creative campaign ideas. Jason and I spent weekends exploring the Bay Area or dreaming up business concepts on our tiny balcony. Then came the company-wide email announcing restructuring. As the newest hire in my department, I was among the first cut. We appreciate your contributions, but unfortunately have to eliminate your position effective immediately. I sat in my cubicle, stunned, clutching a cardboard box with my desk plants and photos. When I called home, seeking some parental comfort for perhaps the last time, my mother's first response was, "Well, what did you do wrong?" Before I could respond, she continued, "Madison just got chosen as the face of a regional jewelry campaign. At 19, the photographer said she has the most photogenic features he's seen in years." The contrast between my professional failure and Madison's success became her favorite conversation topic. During our next family video call, Madison smirked from beside our parents on the sofa. "Maybe you should have picked a more stable career path," she suggested with false concern, "or moved back home where you'd have proper connections." I spent the next 3 months sending out resumes, networking at industry events, and trying to keep afloat financially. Jason's salary covered our rent, but barely. One evening, after receiving my 10th rejection email of the week, I swallowed my pride and called my father to ask for a loan. "Just to tide us over," I explained, hating the tremor in my voice. "I'll pay back every cent once I'm employed again." The pause on the other end stretched uncomfortably. "Your mother and I will need to discuss this," he finally said. "You've made a series of questionable choices, Olivia. Moving across the country, choosing a volatile industry, living with a boyfriend instead of establishing yourself independently." A week later, they transferred $3,000 with a terse email outlining repayment terms, including interest. The humiliation burned deeper than the relief. 2 weeks after that, I finally received a job offer from a smaller agency with potential for growth but requiring a certified digital marketing specialist qualification. The certification course cost $2,500, money we simply didn't have after months of single-income living. Once again, I approached my parents, explaining that this investment would secure stable employment. They invited me home to Connecticut to discuss the matter in person. Desperate and hopeful, I scraped together airfare for a weekend trip. The dinner started well enough, with my grandmother joining us and bringing warmth to the cold formality of my parents' dining room. I carefully presented my case, showing the job offer letter and outlining the certification's value. My father nodded thoughtfully, asking questions about return on investment that made me think he was taking me seriously. Then Madison swept in, fashionably late. "Sorry, everyone," she announced, jingling a set of car keys. "I was out test driving my graduation present." The conversation immediately pivoted to Madison's new luxury convertible, a gift to celebrate her completion of a 2-month modeling course. $45,000 well spent, my father beamed, raising his wine glass. I sat frozen, mental calculations spinning. They'd denied my request for $2,500 for career advancement while spending 18 times that amount on Madison's second car. Later that night, as I helped my grandmother with her coat, she pressed a check into my hand. "For your course?" she whispered. "Don't tell your parents." When I returned to California, Madison began posting daily photos of her new car, expensive lunches, and shopping sprees. She tagged me in each one, ensuring I'd see them. "Living my best. Life. Blessed daughter family support," read the captions. After 2 particularly difficult weeks of her targeted posts, I finally blocked her on all platforms. The next day, my mother called furious. "How dare you be so petty toward your sister? She's hurt that you're obviously jealous of her success." Something inside me snapped. Success? She's 19 with no education, living off mom and dad, and her only achievement is being born pretty. That's not success. That's winning a genetic lottery and being spoiled. The silence on the other end crackled with tension. "I think," my mother finally said, her voice glacial, "that until you can control your jealousy and speak respectfully about your sister, it would be best if we take a break from communication." My father called the next day, demanding I apologize to both my mother and Madison. When I refused, he informed me that they would no longer enable my poor choices with any financial support. "When you're ready to rejoin this family properly and show appropriate respect, we'll be here." I hung up and sat on our small balcony for hours, tears eventually giving way to a strange, empty calm. That weekend, I drove to my grandmother's house to say goodbye in person. At 87, Eleanor Turner still lived independently in the colonial house where she'd raised my father, tending her famous rose garden and hosting weekly bridge games. Her eyes were sad but understanding as I explained my decision to cut contact with my parents and Madison. "I'll keep you in my heart where you've always been," she said, holding my face between her soft, veined hands. "And perhaps we can find our own way to stay connected." Before I left, we established a secret communication system, handwritten, letters sent to my friend Zoe's address, occasional phone calls from her bridge club friend's cell phone. "Your father never calls Meredith, so he'll never know," she winked. The drive back to the airport felt both heartbreaking and freeing, like I was finally stepping out of a role I'd been unsuccessfully playing for 29 years. The first month after cutting contact was the hardest. I'd wake up reaching for my phone to check for family messages out of habit, then remember there wouldn't be any. Sometimes the silence felt like freedom. Other times it felt like abandonment, even though I'd been the one to draw the line. Jason found me crying in the shower one morning, curled up under the water that had long gone cold. "Maybe I'm overreacting," I sobbed as he wrapped me in a towel. "Maybe I should just apologize and go back to the way things were." He sat beside me on the bathroom floor, our backs against the tub. "Olivia, do you remember how you felt every time you got off the phone with them? Every time you read one of Madison's texts? Would going back to that make you healthier or happier?" I knew the answer, but healing wasn't linear. There were days when the certainty of my decision burned bright, and days when doubt clouded everything. My parents attempted contact several times that first year, but each message contained the same subtext. I was the problem, and reconciliation required my admission of fault and submission to the family hierarchy. Madison vacillated between smug silence and vicious text messages from new numbers after I blocked each previous one. "Mom and Dad say you're having some kind of breakdown," she wrote once. "They're so embarrassed when people ask about you." Another time, "Just because nobody wants you doesn't mean you have to punish the rest of us." I saved these messages, but never responded, using them as reminders when my resolve weakened. Grandmother Eleanor became my secret lifeline to family connection. Her letters arrived in light blue envelopes filled with garden updates, local gossip, and unwavering encouragement. "Your grandfather always said courage isn't about being fearless," she wrote once. "It's about feeling the fear and choosing your path anyway." She never pressured me to reconcile, but gently kept the door open should I ever want to. 3 months after the break, I used my grandmother's check to complete the digital marketing certification and secured the job I'd been offered. The position at Horizon Marketing wasn't glamorous, but it provided stability and growth potential. My boss, Diane, was a sharp-witted woman in her 50s who recognized my hunger to prove myself. "Channel that drive into results," she advised, "and you'll go far here." I threw myself into work, volunteering for challenging projects and staying late to master new skills. 6 months in, I received my first promotion to account manager. By the 1-year mark of my family estrangement, other areas of my life were transforming too. I'd found a therapist, Dr. Melissa Chen, who specialized in family trauma and helped me understand the dynamics I'd grown up with. "What you're describing is classic golden child and scapegoat roles," she explained during an IA early session. "It's not about you or Madison as individuals, but about the family system that needed these roles filled." Weekly therapy became my anchor as I unpacked decades of internalized shame and rebuilt my self-image from the ground up. Jason's unwavering support continued to be my safe harbor. On our 3rd anniversary, he proposed during a weekend trip to Big Sur, presenting a simple but elegant ring that he'd saved for months to purchase. "You're the strongest person I know," he said as waves crashed below the cliffside restaurant. I want to build a life with someone who knows her own worth, even when others tried to dim her light. Professionally, I was developing a reputation for innovative campaign strategies. When one of my clients, a sustainable clothing startup, saw their conversion rates triple. After implementing my social media approach, they offered me a position as their marketing director. The substantial salary increase allowed Jason and I to move to a nicer apartment and begin saving for a down payment on a home. It was around this time that Jason, his college friend Tyler, and I began discussing a business idea during our weekend brunches. Tyler's background in app development complemented Jason's software expertise and my marketing skills. We envisioned a platform connecting small, sustainable businesses with conscious consumers, something that combined our professional talents with our shared values. Ethical Marketplace became our working title, then GreenLink, and finally Terra Connect. By the 18-month mark of my family estrangement, we had incorporated, developed a prototype, and begun seeking seed funding. During a stressful week of investor pitches, I received a particularly touching letter from my grandmother. "I'm enclosing a photograph from my garden," she wrote. "The rose bush you gave me for my 75th birthday has finally produced its first bloom. The nursery said this variety might not thrive in Connecticut, but here it is, proving everyone wrong. Reminded me of someone I love very much." I kept that photograph pinned above my desk as a daily reminder of resilience. When Terra Connect secured its first round of funding, exceeding our goal by 30%, we celebrated with a small dinner party in our apartment. Looking around at our gathered friends, the warmth of their genuine support felt like the family I'd chosen rather than the one I'd been born into. With the investment secured, Terra Connect grew rapidly. We hired a small team, moved into office space in Oakland, and launched our beta platform to enthusiastic early adopters. The business press took notice with a profile in a regional tech magazine calling our company a values-driven disruptor in the ethical consumer space. Jason showed me the article with a grin. "Should we send a copy to your parents?" I shook my head, content to celebrate with the people who had actually supported our journey. 2 years into my family estrangement, Jason and I purchased our first home, a charming craftsman-style house in Berkeley with a backyard large enough for the organic vegetable garden I'd always wanted. The day we got the keys, we sat on the empty living room floor with takeout containers and a bottle of champagne. "To building something real," Jason toasted, his voice catching slightly. "To roots that nourish rather than strangle." I took a photo of our new home and mailed it to my grandmother, who responded with delight and a housewarming gift of heirloom tomato seeds from her garden. As Terra Connect continued to grow, attracting larger investors and expanding its user base, I maintained my low social media profile, focused on building our business rather than broadcasting my life. The peace of that relative anonymity ended with a cream-colored envelope in our mailbox, bearing my parents' return address and an invitation that would unexpectedly pull me back into the family orbit I'd so carefully escaped. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, its heavy cream paper and gold-embossed lettering immediately recognizable as my mother's formal stationery. "You are cordially invited to celebrate Eleanor Turner's 80th birthday," it read, with the date set for 3 weeks away. What caught my attention wasn't just the occasion, but the line at the bottom. "Hosted by Madison Turner." My stomach knotted as I ran my fingers over the raised text. 3 years of silence broken not with a reconciliatory phone call or even an email, but with a formal invitation as if nothing had happened. I called my grandmother that evening from the secure line we'd established for our communications. "Did you know about this?" I asked after hearing her warm greeting. Her slight hesitation told me everything. "I did, sweetheart. Madison insisted on planning the whole affair. Your parents mentioned inviting you, and I encouraged them. Selfishly, perhaps, because I'd love to see you." Her voice softened. "But I understand completely if you don't want to come. No pressure from me, ever." What she didn't say, but what hung in the silence between us, was the reality of her advancing age. At 80, each celebration carried the weight of potential. Finality. "I'll think about it," I promised, meaning it, despite the anxiety already building in my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep, pacing our bedroom while Jason watched with concern. Talk to me, he finally said, patting the space beside him on the bed. What's going through your mind right now? The emotions tumbled out uncensored. Part of me wants to see my grandmother and celebrate with her. Part of me is curious about what they want after all this time. But mostly I'm terrified of walking back into that house, of feeling small again, of Madison's smug face and my parents' disapproval. I twisted my engagement ring nervously. What if it's a trap? What if Madison is planning something to humiliate me? She's never forgiven me for standing up to her. Jason considered this carefully. Would you regret not going, especially given your grandmother's age? The question hit me hard. Would I forgive myself if something happened to Grandmother Eleanor and I'd missed this chance to see her? I think I have to go, I finally said, but on my terms, not theirs. The next day, I brought the invitation to my therapy session with Dr. Chen. She studied it before looking up at me with her characteristic directness. What boundaries would make this visit possible for you? We spent the hour outlining protective strategies, staying at a hotel instead of my parents' house, bringing Jason as support, limiting our visit to the actual celebration rather than extending it for multiple days, and having clear exit signals if the situation became too toxic. Remember, Dr. Chen said as our session ended, you're not the same person you were 3 years ago. You're stronger now, with better tools and support systems. You can engage without being engulfed. Over the next week, I crafted a careful response, accepting the invitation, but setting clear parameters. I wrote and rewrote it a dozen times, trying to strike the right balance between civility and self-protection. The final version read, "Thank you for the invitation to Grandmother Eleanor's birthday celebration. Jason and I would be delighted to attend the dinner. We'll be staying at the Westport Inn and look forward to seeing everyone on Saturday evening." Brief, polite, but with clear boundaries established. I mailed it with a mixture of dread and determination. My mother's response came via text, the first direct communication in 3 years. Confirmed for Saturday. Madison has planned a special family dinner after the main reception. Grandmother will be so pleased you're coming. No acknowledgement of the time past, no mention of our estrangement or reconciliation. Just business as usual, Turner family style. The 2 weeks before the event passed in a blur of preparation. I obsessed over finding the perfect outfit, something that projected confidence and success without seeming like I was trying too hard. "You look beautiful in everything," Jason said one night as I tried on the 5th dress in our bedroom. But this isn't really about the clothes, is it? He was right, of course. I was armor shopping, looking for something to shield me from the inevitable judgment. I finally settled on a sapphire blue sheath dress that my friend Zoe described as elegant but powerful. The night before we flew to Connecticut, Jason and I developed a series of signals and exit strategies. A hand on his arm meant I needed immediate support in a conversation. The phrase "I should check on our hotel reservation" was code for "get me out of here now." We role-played potential scenarios. Madison making snide comments, my mother asking invasive questions, my father dismissing my career achievements. "Whatever happens," Jason said as we finished packing, "remember that we have a life and home to return to that's built on mutual respect and love. This is a visit, not a return." That night, I dreamt of drowning in the marble foyer of my parents' house while Madison watched from the staircase, smiling. I woke gasping, my heart racing. Jason pulled me close, his steady heartbeat gradually calming mine. "We can still cancel," he whispered into my hair. "Your grandmother would understand." I shook my head, determination crystallizing through the fear. "No, I need to do this. Not for them, but for me. And for Grandmother Eleanor." After a grounding meditation session and a final call with Dr. Chen, I felt as ready as I could be. As our plane took off for Connecticut, I clutched Jason's hand and reminded myself, I was no longer the scapegoat daughter desperate for approval. I was Olivia Turner, co-founder of a successful company, partner in a healthy relationship, a woman who had built a life on her own terms. Whatever awaited me in Westport, I would face it standing firmly in that truth. The drive from the Westport Inn to my parents' house felt like traversing time rather than mere miles. Each familiar landmark, the stone church with its white steeple, the historic library where I'd spent countless summer hours, the artisanal bakery still displaying the same gold-lettered sign, triggered cascading memories. "You okay?" Jason asked, reaching across the rental car's console to squeeze my hand. I nodded, not trusting my voice as we turned onto Maple Avenue, the tree-lined street where I'd grown up. My parents' colonial-style mansion looked exactly as I remembered. Imposing white columns, meticulously trimmed hedges, and a circular driveway, already filled with luxury vehicles. "Looks like we're fashionably on time rather than early," Jason commented as he parked behind a silver Mercedes. I took a deep breath, checked my reflection in the visor mirror, and silently repeated the affirmation Dr. Chen had suggested, "I am grounded in my worth regardless of how others perceive me." The moment we stepped through the front door, my body betrayed me with its physical response to being back. Shallow breathing, racing pulse, a slight tremor in my hands. The house smelled the same, my mother's signature lilac potpourri mixed with lemon furniture polish. A catering staff member directed us toward the back garden, where guests were gathering for the pre-dinner reception. Before we could make it there, my mother appeared in the hallway, elegant as ever in a cream-colored designer dress, her blonde hair now containing strategic highlights to disguise the gray. "Olivia," she said, her tone pleasant but distant, as if greeting an acquaintance rather than her daughter after 3 years of separation. "You're looking well, and this must be Jason." She extended her hand to him with the practiced smile she reserved for social functions. "Welcome to our home." No hug, no mention of our estrangement, no acknowledgement of the engagement ring clearly visible on my left hand. Jason, bless him, responded with impeccable politeness while keeping his other hand firmly at the small of my back, grounding me. "Thank you for having us, Mrs. Turner. You have a beautiful home." My father appeared next, martini already in hand despite the early hour. His handshake was firm, his nod brusque. "Glad you could make it," he said, his tone suggesting a business meeting rather than a family reunion. "Your grandmother will be pleased." As we moved toward the garden, I spotted Madison holding court near the bar, surrounded by admirers. At 22, she remained striking, though in a more manufactured way than I remembered, her lips slightly fuller, her posture more studied. She wore a form-fitting white dress that ensured she stood out amid the crowd, a not-so-subtle attempt to upstage even the guest of honor. The moment she saw me, her smile tightened into something that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, well, the prodigal sister returns," she said, air-kissing my cheek while keeping her body as far from mine as possible. "And with the boyfriend still in tow. How quaint and stable of you." Before I could respond, I heard a familiar voice call my name with genuine warmth. I turned to see my grandmother making her way toward us, moving slower than I remembered, but with the same straight-back dignity. "Olivia, my darling girl," she said, opening her arms for a real embrace. The knot in my chest loosened slightly as I hugged her, careful not to squeeze too tightly given her fragile frame. "I've missed you terribly," she whispered in my ear. "Thank you for coming." When we pulled apart, I could see tears swimming in her blue eyes, matching my own. "And this handsome young man must be Jason," she continued, taking his hands in hers. "I've heard wonderful things about you from Olivia's letters." Madison's expression soured noticeably at this revelation of our ongoing communication. "Letters? How charmingly old-fashioned," she said with artificial sweetness. "Though I suppose when you're cut off from normal family relationships, you have to get creative." Our grandmother gave Madison a sharp look that silenced her momentarily. "I find written correspondence far more meaningful than those text message things everyone sends nowadays," she said firmly. "Now, Jason, tell me about this business venture Olivia's been describing. It sounds absolutely fascinating." For the next 20 minutes, we enjoyed a genuine conversation with my grandmother, who listened attentively as Jason explained Terra Connect's mission and growth. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Madison whispering with a professionally dressed man I didn't recognize, both of them glancing in my direction. Something about their furtive interaction sent a warning signal down my spine. As the evening progressed, I reconnected with extended family members, some of whom seemed genuinely pleased to see me. My cousin Thomas, who had always been kind, pulled me aside near the dessert table. "It's really good to see you, Liv," he said, using my childhood nickname. "The family gatherings haven't been the same without your sanity-preserving eye rolls during Uncle William's political rants." I laughed, feeling a moment of authentic connection. "Has he gotten more or less conservative since I've been gone?" Thomas grinned. "Let's just say he now has an entire conspiracy theory about squirrels being government spies." Throughout the reception, I noticed my parents performing their well-rehearsed roles as gracious hosts, occasionally steering conversations away whenever guests asked too directly about my long absence or current life. "Olivia's been focusing on her career in California," my mother would say vaguely before changing the subject. Madison, meanwhile, seemed increasingly agitated by the positive attention I was receiving, especially from our grandmother. I overheard her complaining to our mother. "I spent months planning this perfect event, and now everyone's fawning over Olivia just because she bothered to show up after 3 years." Later, as guests mingled before dinner, I excused myself to use the restroom. In the hallway, I accidentally overheard Madison speaking to my parents in hushed but intense tones. "Don't worry, the report is comprehensive. Jenkins is very thorough," she was saying. "We'll do it during the family dinner, after the main reception when it's just us. Grandmother deserves to know what kind of person Olivia really is." I froze, my hand on the bathroom doorknob. Report? Jenkins? A cold sensation spread through my stomach as I connected the strange man Madison had been whispering with to this ominous conversation. When I returned to Jason's side, I squeezed his arm in our prearranged signal. "Everything okay?" he murmured, bending close. "Not sure," I whispered back. "I think Madison's planning something for after the main reception. She mentioned a report about me." Jason's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. "We stick to the plan. Any problems, we leave. You've done nothing wrong. Remember that." As the reception wound down and most guests began departing, my grandmother approached us with a request that sent my anxiety soaring. "I've asked for a special family dinner in the private dining room," she explained, her eyes hopeful. "Just the immediate family. It would mean the world to me, Olivia. To have all my loved ones together." With Madison's overheard words ringing in my ears, every instinct screamed to decline, to make our polite excuses and retreat to the safety of our hotel. But looking into my grandmother's expectant face, I couldn't bring myself to disappoint her. "Of course, grandmother," I found myself saying. "We'd be happy to join you." As we followed the family toward the private dining room, Jason squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Whatever happens, we face it together," he promised. I squared my shoulders and walked forward, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. The private dining room glowed with candlelight, the family's finest china and crystal arranged on the antique mahogany table that had hosted Turner formal dinners for generations. My grandmother sat at the head, with my parents flanking her, on either side. Madison had deliberately arranged the seating to place herself beside our father, while positioning me directly across from her, maximizing her ability to observe my reactions throughout the meal. The mysterious man I now suspected was Jenkins sat beside Madison, his expression professionally neutral as he nodded politely in my direction. "This is Mr. Jenkins," Madison introduced with practiced casualness. "A business associate who's been helping me with a special project." I met his gaze directly, noting his slight discomfort when I extended my hand. "Interesting. What line of business are you in, Mr. Jenkins?" He cleared his throat. "Private investigation and corporate intelligence," he replied, his tone carefully modulated. "I provide information services to clients with specific needs." The confirmation of my suspicion sent ice through my veins, but years of navigating Turner family dynamics had taught me to maintain a composed exterior. Beside me, I felt Jason tense, almost imperceptibly. The first course arrived, a lobster, bisque that my grandmother particularly enjoyed. As servers poured wine, my mother launched into carefully scripted small talk about neutral topics: the unseasonably warm weather, the renovations to the country club, a mutual acquaintance's daughter's wedding. My father occasionally contributed brief comments about the stock market or local property values. The superficial conversation continued through the second course, a fennel and orange salad that I barely tasted. The tension beneath the practiced Civility was palpable, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. My grandmother, seeming to sense the undercurrents, attempted to bridge the emotional distance. "I'm so grateful to have everyone I love most in the world gathered around this table," she said, her voice slightly tremulous. "Life is too short and too precious to waste on anything but love and forgiveness." She reached for my hand across the table. "Having Olivia home again makes this birthday truly special." Madison's smile tightened at our grandmother's words. "Yes, we're all so curious about Olivia's life in California," she said, her tone sugary but eyes sharp. "She's been rather mysterious about her so-called success, hasn't she?" My mother shifted uncomfortably. "Madison, perhaps this isn't the time." Madison interrupted, placing her hand on Jenkins's arm. "Actually, Mother, I think Grandmother's birthday is the perfect occasion for honesty and transparency. Don't you agree, Daddy?" My father looked momentarily uncertain, glancing between Madison's determined face and my grandmother's confused one. "Perhaps we should wait until after dessert for any serious discussions," he suggested. But Madison was already committed to her timeline. "I have something important to share about Olivia," she announced, straightening in her seat with the confident posture of someone about to deliver a winning argument. "Something I think everyone here deserves to know." All eyes turned to me and I fought the urge to flee. Jason's hand found mine under the table, steady and warm. "As you know," Madison continued, her voice taking on a performative concern, "Olivia has been making some rather grand claims about her life in California. A successful business, a beautiful home, community recognition." She tilted her head with false sympathy. It seemed so unlikely given her history of, well, not quite measuring up. So I became concerned that perhaps she was fabricating achievements to justify her abandonment of the family. The word abandonment hung in the air like a slap. Before I could respond, Madison gestured to Jenkins. "That's why I hired Mr. Jenkins and his firm. To understand what Olivia's life is really like, so we could help her if needed, instead of enabling potential delusions." My initial shock was quickly transforming into indignation. "You hired a private investigator to spy on me?" I asked, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Jenkins had the grace to look slightly embarrassed as he removed a folder from his briefcase. "Ms. Turner contracted our services for a comprehensive background report," he confirmed, his professional tone at odds with the deeply personal nature of the intrusion. My grandmother's face had gone pale. "Madison, what have you done?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is not what family does to one another." Madison ignored her, focusing instead on my parents. "The truth is about to come out," she said triumphantly. "We'll finally see just how successful Olivia really is." A heavy silence fell over the table as Jenkins opened his folder, seeming increasingly uncomfortable with his role in the family drama. I sat frozen, feeling suddenly exposed and vulnerable in a way I hadn't since leaving this house 3 years ago. The familiar sensation of being the family scapegoat, the one always found wanting, threatened to overwhelm me. But then Jason's thumb traced a small, reassuring circle on my palm, and I remembered Dr. Chen's words. "You're not the same person you were 3 years ago." Taking a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders and looked directly at Jenkins. "Please," I said calmly, "go ahead with your report. I have nothing to hide." Madison's triumphant smile wavered slightly at my unexpected composure. Jenkins cleared his throat again, glancing between Madison and me before beginning to speak. "As requested, we conducted a thorough investigation into Ms. Olivia Turner's current circumstances in California, including financial status, property, holdings, business ventures, and community standing." He flipped to the first page of his report while Madison leaned forward eagerly, ready to witness my humiliation. What none of us realized was that the truth was about to shock everyone at the table, myself included. Jenkins adjusted his tie, a gesture that betrayed his discomfort with the situation Madison had placed him in. "Our investigation into Ms. Olivia Turner's current circumstances was, as requested, extremely thorough," he began, his professional tone contrasting sharply with the family tension surrounding him. "We examined financial records, business filings, property documentation, and conducted discreet interviews with associates." Madison nodded encouragingly, her smile tight with anticipation. And what did you find about her so-called successful business? She prompted, clearly expecting confirmation of her suspicions. Jenkins glanced down at his report, then back up at the table. Terra Connect, co-founded by Ms. Turner 3 years ago, is currently valued at approximately $28 million based on its most recent funding round. My father's fork clattered against his plate. $28 million? He repeated. His financial instincts immediately engaged. Jenkins nodded, continuing matter-of-factly. The company has shown exceptional growth, with a user base expanding at roughly 20% quarter over quarter. They currently employ 47 people and occupy 2 floors in a premium Oakland office building. He flipped to the next page. Their platform connecting ethical businesses with conscious consumers has been featured in Business Insider, Forbes, and was named one of 20 startups to watch by TechCrunch last year. My mother's complexion had paled noticeably, while Madison's confident smirk had frozen into a rigid mask. That must be some mistake, she interjected. Check the property information. She's probably living in some tiny apartment or something. Jenkins cleared his throat. Regarding residential status, Ms. Turner and Mr. Chen purchased a craftsman-style home in Berkeley 18 months ago. The property is valued at approximately $1.8 million, with 60% equity, already established. He hesitated before continuing. Their mortgage payments are well within reasonable parameters for their income level, suggesting sound financial management. My grandmother's face had transformed from concern to a mixture of pride and vindication. Well, she said, reaching for her water glass with a slightly trembling hand. This doesn't sound like someone in need of family intervention, does it? Madison's cheeks flushed with anger and embarrassment. What about her personal life? Her reputation? There must be something. Jenkins interrupted with a discreet cough. Ms. Turner is highly regarded in her professional community. She serves on the board of the Bay Area Young Entrepreneurs Association and mentors female business students at Berkeley. She and Mr. Chen are engaged to be married next spring, as publicly announced in their local paper 3 months ago. This revelation caused my mother to glance at my engagement ring with new interest, though she quickly masked her reaction. My father, ever focused on financial details, leaned forward. And the business model of this company? Is it sustainable? Jenkins actually smiled slightly for the first time. Remarkably so. Terra Connect operates on a combination of subscription and transaction fee models, with consistent profit margins above industry averages. Their investor list includes several prominent venture capital firms known for backing successful tech companies. As the investigator continued detailing Terra Connect's business metrics, Madison's frustration became increasingly evident. What about her personal life? She interrupted again, more desperately this time. Did you check her social media? Her friends? There must be something there. Jenkins's professional demeanor faltered slightly. Ms. Turner maintains a minimal social media presence, focused primarily on business networking. Her personal associations appear to be a small but close circle of friends and colleagues. He hesitated, glancing uncomfortably at Madison. As per your additional request last week, we did investigate whether there was any evidence of substance abuse, financial misconduct, or inappropriate relationships. We found nothing of concern. My grandmother's eyebrows shot up at this revelation of the depths of Madison's investigation, while my parents exchanged troubled glances. Jason's hand tightened around mine under the table, but I remained outwardly calm, watching the family dynamics shift in real time. The investigator paused, glancing at Madison with clear reluctance before continuing. However, during the course of our investigation, we did uncover some concerning financial irregularities. Madison sat up straighter, anticipation returning to her expression. I knew it. What did you find? Jenkins cleared his throat. The irregularities were not related to Ms. Olivia Turner, but rather to another member of the family. An uncomfortable silence descended on the table as he carefully set aside his original report and pulled out a separate document. When conducting routine background checks, our system flagged unusual credit activity and financial transactions connected to Madison Turner. Madison's face drained of color. That wasn't what I hired you for, she hissed, reaching for the document. Jenkins smoothly moved it beyond her grasp. My firm is ethically obligated to report potential fraud or identity theft when discovered, regardless of who our client is. My parents were now sitting rigid in their chairs, expressions vacillating between confusion and alarm. Jenkins continued professionally. Our investigation revealed that Ms. Madison Turner has accumulated approximately $187,000 in credit card debt across 11 different accounts, 4 of which were opened, using slightly altered versions of her parents' identification information. My father made a strangled noise. What? Madison's eyes darted frantically around the table. He's lying. This is ridiculous. I would never, Jenkins continued implacably. Additionally, the modeling contract that was referenced in previous Family Communications appears to have been terminated approximately 18 months ago due to unprofessional conduct, though Ms. Turner has continued to receive financial support from her parents under the pretense of ongoing modeling assignments. My mother's hand covered her mouth. Madison, is this true? She whispered. Madison pushed back from the table abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. This is a setup. Olivia put him up to this. She's always been jealous of me. Her voice had risen to a near shout, her carefully cultivated poise crumbling. My grandmother reached across the table, her aged hand gently covering mine. I always knew, she said softly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I always knew you would find your way, Olivia. Your strength was evident even when you were a little girl with skinned knees and determination in your eyes. Madison stood suddenly, her napkin falling unnoticed to the floor. This dinner is over, she announced, her voice shaking. I don't have to listen to these lies. Jenkins calmly gathered his documents. I can provide bank statements and documentation, supporting all findings in my report, Mr. and Mrs. Turner, should you wish to review them. Madison shot him a venomous look before storming from the room, the dining room door slamming behind her with enough force to rattle the crystal glasses on the table. An uncomfortable silence descended in her wake. My father finally broke it, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. Olivia, I don't know what to say. This is unexpected. I sat perfectly still, processing the dramatic reversal of what Madison had clearly intended as my public humiliation. For years, I had fantasized about proving my worth to my family, about forcing them to acknowledge they had been wrong about me. Yet now that the moment had arrived, I felt strangely hollow. Their validation, I realized, was no longer something I needed. My grandmother seemed to read my thoughts, giving my hand another gentle squeeze. Sometimes, she said quietly, the greatest victory isn't in making others see your worth, but in no longer needing them to. With those words, I found an unexpected strength flowing through me. Looking around at my stunned family members, I realized I now had a choice about how this long-awaited confrontation would unfold. The dining room remained frozen in a tableau of shock and confusion, my father staring blankly at the space Jenkins' report had occupied, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed napkin, and my grandmother watching me with quiet pride. The moment stretched, pregnant with possibilities. I could storm out as Madison had done. I could gloat over her exposure and my vindication. I could demand apologies for years of mistreatment. Instead, I found myself taking a deep, centering breath. I didn't come here tonight for revenge or validation, I said finally, my voice steady. I came because I love my grandmother and wanted to celebrate her birthday. That hasn't changed. My father's eyes met mine, really seeing me perhaps for the first time in years. Olivia, we clearly misjudged your situation, he said, struggling to find appropriate words. The business you've built sounds impressive. You should have told us. I couldn't help but laugh, though without bitterness. I tried, Dad. For years, I tried telling you about my dreams, my struggles, my achievements. You and Mom weren't interested unless they matched your predefined vision for my life. My mother flinched slightly but didn't contradict me. Perhaps we could discuss a potential investment in your company, my father offered, retreating to the familiar territory of financial transactions. $28 million valuation is significant. We should have family representation in such a venture. Jason, who had remained supportively silent until now, gently squeezed my hand under the table. I shook my head. Terra Connect isn't looking for new investors currently, and if we were, any investment would be evaluated on standard business terms, not family connections. My grandmother smiled at this, a small but approving nod. What your father is trying to say in his emotionally stunted way, she interjected with characteristic frankness, is that he's proud of you and wants to be part of your success. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably, but didn't disagree. I considered my next words carefully. For 29 years, I tried to earn your approval and love. I twisted myself into shapes that weren't authentic, hoping that if I just achieved enough or complied enough, you would finally see me. 3. Years ago, I stopped trying, not because I stopped loving you, but because I finally understood that I needed to love myself first. Tears welled in my mother's eyes, surprising me. Victoria Turner rarely displayed emotion. We always loved you, Olivia, she said softly. We just wanted what was best for you. No, I replied gently but firmly. You wanted what fit your image of success. There's a difference. And you consistently chose Madison's perception of reality over mine, even when she was clearly manipulating you. My grandmother nodded sagely. The family system became unbalanced long ago, she observed. Robert, Victoria, you created roles for your daughters rather than seeing them as individuals. Madison as the golden child, Olivia as the scapegoat. Neither position was fair to either girl. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances, unaccustomed to such direct confrontation. What happens now? My mother finally asked, her voice small. Are you back in the family, or? I considered the question seriously. I'm willing to explore building a new relationship, I said carefully, but it would need to be based on mutual respect and healthy boundaries. I won't return to old patterns. My grandmother reached over and patted my hand. Perfectly reasonable, she declared, and perhaps overdue. The conversation was interrupted by a server entering with dessert, momentarily relieving the emotional intensity. As we picked at slices of my grandmother's favorite lemon cake, my mother hesitantly broached the subject of Madison. She's always been high-spirited, she began defensively. I'm sure there's an explanation for what that investigator found. I set down my fork. Mom, that's exactly the problem. You're already looking for ways to excuse behavior in Madison that you would never tolerate in me. Until that changes, we can't have a healthy family dynamic. My father, ever practical once recovering from shock, turned to Jenkins, who had remained discreetly in the background. We'll need to see those financial records. If Madison has been using our information fraudulently... He trailed off, the implications settling heavily. 2 weeks after returning to California, I received a call from my grandmother with surprising news. I've decided to sell the house and move to assisted living, she announced without preamble. And I found the perfect place just 20 minutes from you in Berkeley. Her decision sent ripples through the family. My parents, though initially resistant, eventually helped with the logistics of her move. Madison refused to speak to anyone, for weeks after the birthday dinner debacle, eventually breaking her silence only to demand legal representation when my parents began addressing the fraudulent accounts. Grandmother Eleanor thrived in her new senior community, making friends and starting a small garden club within weeks of arrival. Having her close by was healing for both of us, creating space for the supportive family relationship I'd always craved. My parents made halting, awkward attempts at reconciliation, sometimes reverting to old patterns before catching themselves. My mother occasionally sent articles about Terra Connect that she found online, a small acknowledgement of my success. My father made stiff, formal overtures, once sending a handwritten note congratulating us on a business achievement mentioned in the Wall Street Journal. Progress came in tiny increments, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Through it all, Jason remained my steadfast partner, offering perspective when family interactions left me questioning my boundaries. They're trying, he'd observe after particularly difficult phone calls with my parents. Not always succeeding, but trying. Madison's journey was more troubled. After the initial exposure of her financial deceptions, she cycled through denial, blame, and eventually, when faced with potential legal consequences, reluctant admission. My parents paid off her fraudulent debts to avoid scandal, but insisted she enter financial counseling and therapy. Her communications with me consisted primarily of passive-aggressive text messages, oscillating between accusations and backhanded compliments about my lucky break in business. As our wedding approached, Jason and I decided on a small ceremony in our backyard garden. My grandmother would be there, of course, as would my parents, though in a limited capacity. Madison declined the invitation with a terse note claiming prior commitments. The night before the wedding, sitting on our porch swing with my grandmother as stars appeared above Berkeley's hills, I found myself reflecting on the journey. "Do you think people really change?" I asked her, thinking of the fragile new dynamics forming in our family. She considered the question with the wisdom of her 80 years. "People can change when three things align," she said finally. "They need to recognize the problem, feel genuine remorse, and have the courage to do the difficult work of transformation. Some people manage all three, many achieve only one or two, and some never start the process at all." She patted my hand. "Your parents are somewhere in the middle of that journey. Madison hasn't really begun, and you, my dear, have traveled the furthest of all." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful. Standing with Jason under the arbor we'd built together, surrounded by friends who had become family and family who were learning to respect boundaries, I felt a peace I'd never known in my childhood home. Life wasn't perfect. Relationships remained works in progress. Old wounds occasionally reopened, and Madison's absence was a reminder of unresolved conflicts. But I no longer measured my worth through others' approval or disapproval. The journey, from family scapegoat to self-actualized adult, had taught me that true family isn't always defined by blood, but by respect, support, and unconditional positive regard. Sometimes the healthiest thing we can do is break free from toxic patterns, even when it means stepping away from connections we were born into. And sometimes, if we're fortunate, those broken connections can be rebuilt on healthier foundations. Not perfectly, but authentically. What has your experience been with setting boundaries with family members? Have you ever had to distance yourself from toxic relationships to protect your well-being? Drop a comment below sharing your story or perspective, and if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about navigating complex family dynamics and finding your authentic path. Remember that your worth isn't determined by others' inability to see your value. Thank you for listening, and I hope my journey has offered some comfort if you're walking a similar path.